Hello and welcome to Cyber Resilience, Bridging Security and IT Operations for Seamless Recovery. Today's webinar is sponsored by Pure Storage and produced by Actual Tech Media. My name is Scott Becker. I'm from Actual Tech, and I am excited to be your moderator for this special event. Now, before we get to today's great session, we do have a few housekeeping items that are going to help you get the most out of it. First off, we want this to be an informative event for you. So we encourage any questions in the questions box in your webinar control panel. So not only will we have team members responding to questions during the live event, but we'll also have a dedicated Q&A session at the end of the presentation where we'll discuss in greater detail some of the top questions that you have. That Q&A panel is also the place to let us know about any technical issues that you might be experiencing. A browser refresh will fix most audio, video, or slide advancement issues. But if that doesn't work, just let us know in the Q&A and we'll provide further technical assistance. Now, second, in the handout section of your webinar control panel, you'll find that we're offering several resources. I'd especially like to call your attention to a 451 research report on achieving cyber resilience requires teamwork, and a piece of S&P Global Market Intelligence on why collaborative cybersecurity is the key to resilience. So I encourage you to access those resources now and share them with your friends and colleagues. Now, third, at the end of this webinar event, we will be awarding a $250 Amazon gift card to one lucky registrant. Of course, you must be in attendance during the live event to qualify for the prize. Official terms and conditions of today's prize drawing can be found in the handout section. Just scroll to the bottom and you'll find the link with the details there. Okay, with that housekeeping out of the way, let's get to today's fantastic session. So it's my pleasure to introduce you to our presenters today. We have Henry Baltazar, who's Research Director at S&P Global Market Intelligence, and Jason Walker, Global Practice Leader for Cyber Resiliency at Pure Storage. So now I'm going to turn things over to Henry to get us started.
Thank you for joining us for today's Tech Talk. Today's topic, we're going to be talking about cyber resilience, bridging security and IT operations for seamless recovery. My name is Henry Baltazar, and I'm the Research Director of Storage at S&P Global. Today, I'm joined by Jason Walker. Nice to have you today, Jason.
Hey, Henry. Yeah, great to be with you again. Hey, I am Jason Walker. Henry's absolutely right. I am a Global Practice Leader and Director of Technical Strategy for Cyber Resilience at Pure Storage. And, you know, Henry, we've been doing this an awfully long time, buddy. And happy to be talking about yet another evolution into the world that we know so well, cyber resilience.
Yeah, I think when I think about this topic is so fascinating because let's face it, I mean, there's a lot of interesting things in our verticals, in our silos, but the most interesting stuff winds up being in the adjacents. And I think that's what we're trying to address today. What's the best way for our security team people to work together with our IT infrastructure people, our storage people? Because quite frankly, when we start looking at these challenges, we need to have everybody on the same page to get these things done. I think one thing I'll emphasize when we start looking at these different trends in disaster recovery, time is money. And the faster you can get back up on your feet, the less money you're going to lose when there's an incident. And I think those are the things that we have to keep in mind as to why it's important for us to work so closely together. For today's presentation, we're going to be starting out talking about some of my latest research from our surveys in terms of what's going on with disaster recovery. And then we'll also be talking about the NIST framework later in the presentation to discuss a bit about where we think there are opportunities for security and IT infrastructure and storage type professionals to work together. One of the most important things to start off with, and shouldn't be a big surprise, more likely than not, your organization is going to have an outage. In our most recent survey, what we found was 71% of our respondents have already had an outage or experienced one. And when we say an outage, it's an outage that was significant. Significant in that it led to either a loss of data or a significant loss of productivity for workers, which is clearly very bad. I think the other thing that's very crucial is the fact that when we look at this data, almost a third of the respondents had one in the last 2 years. So more likely than not, your organization is going to have an outage. And I think that's one of these big drivers. Jason, from your perspective, are you seeing that fear or that concern when you talk to customers about what's going on with their environment and resiliency?
I think folks have gotten the picture, Henry, that it's not a matter of if, but when. It used to be, we might get accused of being doom and gloomers, fear casting out there to try to gin up some conversation, when clearly that's not the case. And the numbers that you show are striking in terms of reach. And a lot of these folks aren't just getting hit once, they're getting hit multiple times in the thing. And the cycles are getting tighter and tighter as we go along.
I agree. It's such a painful problem, but I mean, that's why we're here today. That's why we're trying to bridge these gaps. Diving a little bit deeper into numbers, another scary aspect is the mean cost of recent outages is high and it continues to go up. Right now it's 2.15. In more recent studies, I believe it's going to continue to keep rising and rising and rising. That to me is very scary. I mean, if you're trying to justify budget, right there.
Right.
If you get hit by an outage, it could be millions of dollars or even substantially more, depending on the size of your organization, depending on the things that you have at risk in terms of workloads and revenue loss. I think another key thing that really scares me is the fact that when we talk to customers about, okay, what happened in your recent outage? How did you recover from it? Even the ones that were responsible and had things in place to be able to processes and infrastructure and all these things in place, 70% said that it took a moderate to significant amount of effort to recover and have a complete failback after a incident, which to me shows that we need to make this better.
Right.
It's not just enough to have the safety net. We need to make sure that we can bounce back quickly because, again, time is money. Every hour, every day, it could be even months for some of these things to come back online. That's a significant amount of money that organizations are going to lose. And we need to tighten these things up to make sure that when something happens, we find the best ways to get back. And I think another thing that's really important and a big topic for why this is important today is 29% of the recent outages have been caused by security issues such as ransomware. That in our surveys the last couple of years, it's been neck and neck between ransomware security and network issues. But those two have been the top issues, but those two are very, very big issues. Are you seeing the same thing, Jason, in terms of when people are talking about the resiliency issues? Are they coming to you and saying, we're really fine, network outages, act of God? There's a lot of different things that can happen. Disasters could happen. But how often is that security issue coming up?
Yeah, a lot. And, you talk about a security issue and right at the outset, Henry, you talk about working together. I think one of the if you could do a trend line in your study, I think, how many people are involved in the process now than they were even 5 years ago. The number is tremendous, all the way up to board level in there. And the reason why is because these attacks and these outages are happening in such more frequent cycles. And it requires, after every event, you should be doing some sort of debrief and figure out you said 70%, significant effort. How do we get that number lower? And what do we need to invest in? And it takes that whole team. It takes a lot of different folks involved to make that happen. And the one thing that I just noted on first of all, cost. Nobody's, eager to tell you how much they got beat out of or how much that is. But in talking to one of our healthcare customers, Henry, they don't even measure it in terms of money. Of course, they do measure it in money, but they talk about lives that are being lost as a result of downtime. And they actually have a measurement around lives saved, maybe is a better way to look at it rather than lives lost. But the stakes are high, and clearly these numbers show that it's not going away. It's something that has to be addressed and addressed firmly by every organization.
Yeah. Definitely one point I want to circle back and harp on that you made was great was, let's face it, there's a lot of offerings out there. There's a lot of services. There's a lot of technology. We've done a lot of those things, and those things are there. The tools are there. The capabilities are there. Even if you need help, it's there. The problem is, if your teams aren't working together, it's not going to matter. That to me is why that 70% is so high. It's because they weren't coordinated in the first place. It's because they said, well, we just spent a bunch of money on this. Shouldn't it work? No, I mean, just because you have things in place, it has to be a fine-tuned machine. It's something that we have to maintain and keep going. It's not just something where, okay, right, I paid my insurance policy, we're done. No, it's not that. That's not what this is. No, not if you want it to really work, and not if you want it to be transformative for your business. But I think the big thing here is we need to work together. There are plenty of tools. There's plenty of technology, but if you don't use those tools and technologies and even services correctly, that's on you.
Right.
So let's figure out the best ways to do that going forward.
The best tool any organization has is how well they communicate with each other. It's the number one tool out there.
Absolutely. And diving into what Jason was talking about, it's more than just lost data and lost worker productivity. Yeah. There's a lot of really negative things that can happen here. We had 31% saying that they directly lost revenue because missed business opportunities, not being able to answer the call, not being able to respond to customers. That's a big deal. A lot of organizations, almost every organization, cares about customer experience. Look at these different metrics. Look at these things that are being impacted negatively because of that. And think of that, how much, if you look at it from the outside, how much marketing are you going to have to spend just to fix this if you have these big issues, right? Lost revenue opportunities. You have lost customer loyalty. You've got damaged reputation, 17%. Then you start seeing these other elements, penalties related to compliance. You know, especially if you're in like healthcare or in financial services or any of these verticals with tight SLAs, those are going to be big, tangible issues, and they're going to lead to money loss. And the last one, I don't like bringing up too much, but it came up in the last survey: employee termination. I think we can everybody can get aligned with that. We don't want employee terminations, but now that 13% of respondents said that's what happened after their incident. These things kind of scare me. Are you seeing the same things for yourself, Jason, when you talk to customers? Are they very much talking about customer experience too?
Yeah, absolutely. I think, and what it all feeds into is making the case for better prevention and preparation rather than reaction. Reaction costs, as you're showing here, way more than prevention. And but there's some challenges with that too that I know we'll talk about as you go through. But I think that what these numbers show is that there is a definite need for better preparation, better collaboration to avoid, some of those things, because each one of those, it costs so much more to remediate and get back in front of than it does maybe to prevent some of this.
Yeah, exactly. Once you break something, it's hard to put everything back together the same way. And it's just something we need to deal with going forward. And again, I think that's a lot of these reasons why we need to go out there and make sure we're investing in this and making sure, because so many different things at risk when we start talking about these outages. Getting to the next slide, when we start looking at why we need resiliency improvements, to me, we definitely need to do a much better job at disaster recovery testing. We need to also start looking at our infrastructure. Are we using the right type of infrastructure to provide this type of resiliency? And then also, as we were talking before, it's about security coordination as well. Again, the first number, we already saw that, but I mean, again, 70%, moderate to significant effort just to fail back. And those are organizations that already spent the money and spent some resources to do that. So obviously it's a big issue there. Another key issue and another big thing we have to start thinking about is the majority of organizations are already favoring a cloud-based data protection strategy using hybrid cloud or backup to cloud. So when we start thinking about these things, it just makes sense, because what's the best things we want to do? We want to do things like the 3-2-1 rule. We want to make sure we have multiple copies of backups. But the other part of that is we have to have another copy of that backup in a remote location. Cloud, for that example, winds up being interesting in that case, because now you have another copy of the data outside of your infrastructure. So if it is a hurricane or some kind of thing that knocks out a data center, there's another way for you to recover that data or access that data going forward. I think another key thing, and I think there's another area where we need all hands on deck, is testing for disaster recovery. Right now, I only see 27% of respondents doing more than 2 tests a year. To me, it's just not enough. It's not enough. The reason I say that, and the reason why things have changed, this isn't like the mainframe days where, okay, it's time to do disaster recovery. Everybody loses a weekend and nobody wants to do that, right? The reality is we have extremely dynamic infrastructures and workloads now. It's not that mainframe or just this physical workload sitting in the corner. We need to make sure that comes back up. We have lots of virtualization, lots of containers, lots of different things, like services all over the place, SaaS services, all these things that we have to protect. And when I start looking at these things, all those software pieces, there's constant changes, firmware changes, updates, same on the hardware side for your storage, networking, and servers. To me, unless we do a better job of that, we're not going to be able to fix this. Do you agree? How do you see this also in terms of preparation and testing?
Absolutely. And a lot of the regulatory stuff that's coming down, Henry, is putting a mirror in a lot of companies' faces to say, hey, are you prepared? And how do you know? How do you know you can do it? And you're right, all the different silos and all the different types of applications. How do you know? We have customers now that are able to do test restores once a month just to make sure the process is sound, just to make sure they practice some of the inter company communications that go into that and report on that. It's become as much a part of their routine as patching and things of that nature. And that's wise to be able to do that. So there's no surprises as you go along. So yes, absolutely. Testing recovery has been a very high growth action in companies recently for that reason. And they're going to have to be, because even international regulatory stuff like DORA and things of that nature are going to make its way across the world because it's just very sound policy. Nobody wants to see companies being down a long time. So how do you do that? Well, you got to practice. Practice makes perfect, Henry. And that's what so we definitely are seeing that out there. And we certainly coach all the customers that we talk to, if they're not doing it, to start making plans on doing it.
Yeah, and I'm not gonna put all of this burden on the customer. The customers have a lot of this burden. Obviously, it's their business, their responsibility. Yeah. But I think the industry also has an obligation to help customers with this issue. In particular, I think more and more of these vendors, I know you guys are doing this as well, but more of these vendors have to put in the work in terms of help us with our automation, help us with proactive tools, help us find when we make mistakes. Because the more automation we could do, the thing is, like, a lot of people don't like doing let's face it, they don't want to do disaster recovery testing because they're super busy. Last thing they want to do is waste a weekend doing these things. Well, there's no excuse for that if you're working with your vendors, you're doing the automation so this can run in the background, and you don't have to worry about losing a weekend. You don't have to worry about pulling everybody off the field and saying, okay, it's time for us to do DR testing. There's a lot of things we can do there. I think, to me, first and foremost, we definitely need to do a much better job with the automation. And I think that goes back to the thing you were talking about. We have to do these tabletop exercises. Okay, this bad thing happened. What are you doing, security team? What are you doing, networking team? What are you doing, compliance team? I think we all need to have these, that type of preparation has to happen. Part of that's going to be the automation. And then again, as I mentioned earlier, the tools have to get better too. We have to get smarter, more intelligent tools. We're seeing more AI and ML being used with these tools so they can find and start seeing these things. And that's something we're going to be talking a bit later when we talk a little about this framework and trying to do a better job of identifying and trying to stop these problems before they become big, blown out problems. The last issue we already talked about, but gotta keep saying it. Security is a big part of the problem. Security is going to cause a lot of these outages. We need to make sure we're all on the same page to be able to fix that.
Yep. One of the things that we get asked about, Henry, you're spot on, is everybody's being asked to work together. And how can we automate that process so I don't have just separate solutions, even if it's SIMSOAR or some of these other areas, or identifying data. How do we work together more fluently so the customer isn't on the hook for constantly trying to hold everything together themselves and make things work together? They're asking the vendor community, you guys work together and make solutions for us that can be more automated and more easy to use and easier to either detect or recover from those kind of attacks.
Yeah, definitely. Now we're going to go into the next section where we're going to be talking a bit how can you bridge the IT and security gap going forward. And this was it's an interesting data point I got from our security team, but this is scary and makes me feel bad for the security people. Very, very bad for the security people. Unfortunately, when you look at it, there's no sugarcoating it. Our security teams are definitely overwhelmed now, and it's getting worse. When we look back to just 2020, security teams in our survey said that 37% of their incidents, or 37% of the things they're getting flagged on, they weren't able to check on in that day. That's worse now. Now it's up to 54%. So imagine that. Over half of these incidents popping up, you don't even have time to check that within a day. And as we were talking about before, time is money and also risk. All these different things can happen that are terrible. Are you hearing this from your security professional customers
Well,
as
I
well?
think absolutely. We talk to them all the time, and it's because there's even more. I mean, like as you talked about AI becoming a part of that as well, and it's a growth industry. Unfortunately, on the criminal side, there's even more, and there's more areas of entry, and there's more of an attack plane to have to address. So yeah, we definitely see this burden out there, and it informs kind of the approach and prioritization moving forward on where companies want to invest.
Yeah, definitely. And again, when I look at this, this is what's scary. It's scary as a lot of us, we're really, really busy. We've got lots of initiatives to work on, lots of things to do in our day-to-day lives. And sometimes when you think about disaster recovery, yeah, we all know it's important, but we're always focused on what's today. But to me, when I look at this, the today for security teams is so terrible or so difficult. We definitely need to do a better job as organizations to help and make sure that, you know, let's say within the 54%, if we could find something to help validate and escalate those things, I think that gives us a better shot at being able to try to stop these problems before we have big issues.
Right.
So yes, as we were saying, it's definitely, we need to do a better job working together because the security people are definitely overwhelmed at this point. And in that regard, now's a good time to start talking about how do we start working together. When we look at the NIST CSF 2.0 framework, there's definitely 6 key functions that we have to think about in terms of how we can better manage and reduce cybersecurity risk. The first function we'll talk about is on the governance side. Obviously, we need to do a better job of establishing and monitoring an organization's cybersecurity risk management strategy, expectations, and setting the policies. Second, and the first 2 are really more on the security and compliance side of things, but the second part being identify. We need to be, the security professionals in particular need to help determine what is the current cybersecurity risk for the organizations and how do we deal with these things going forward. But I think the next areas, and these are the areas that we'll be diving into in the next slide, but protect is definitely one of those first issues where we start thinking about security and IT operations and backup teams need to work together. By protect, we start thinking about how do we use safeguards to protect, to prevent or reduce cybersecurity risk. On the detect phase, what can we do better in terms of how do we find and analyze possible cybersecurity attacks and compromises? In the 5th phase, we start thinking about how do we take action regarding detected cybersecurity when we do have a cybersecurity incident, what do we do to respond as quickly as possible? And then finally, the recovery issue in terms of how do we restore assets and operations that were impacted by cybersecurity risk and get these things back online. Let's go to the next slide because I think this is where we're going to dive a bit deeper with Jason on this. To me, this is the big part is about how do we start working again? How do we start working together, security and IT operations? Where are these areas to collaborate? And let's start with the first one, the protect. We start looking at this, security and IT teams, I feel we definitely need to work better on the monitoring aspects of this. We need to do a much better job at the IT job. Obviously, they have to work on automating backups. They need to make sure they do a better job of encrypting both data at rest and at flight. I think those are really key issues. But one issue that I'm going to ask Jason about that I think is also big is the topic of immutable storage. To me, immutable storage is essential also. To me, it's not just about having a copy of backup and a safety net. It's making sure that safety net is protected. Jason, can you tell me a little bit about what Pure Storage is doing today in terms of how are you providing immutable storage and how are you helping organizations deploy and manage that?
Yeah, absolutely, Henry. We talk to all of our customers as soon as data is born. That little baby data, you want to protect it in the crib. We want to do that, and Pure provides a very intelligent, very lightweight means of doing it through snapshots, which is immutable. Snapshots are immutable, but then we took an extra step and made those immutable snapshots indelible, which means you can't remove them. So immutability is nice, but indelibility gives it that extra bit of security that you want. We do that with a process that we call safe mode, which is the ability to protect manual eradication of that indelibility around that. And we do it with a very sophisticated checks and balances system. It requires, the old 2 keys in the silo. Remember that from the old War Games movie, and back in the 80s. Be able to do that, creating an off gap, which is very hard to break. So, you have the immutability of the snapshot in general, and that can be single site, multiple sites, can be in a pod, a high availability pod, whatever the visibility of your data says should be protected. And it provides that in there. But that immutability and indelibility from a snapshot layer and that safe mode, protecting it from eradication, and more importantly, Henry, schedules and array uptime. And so there's no funny business you can do kind of behind the scenes that these cyber criminals are overwhelming the security teams with all the different ways they can come at it. It's nice to have kind of a set it and forget it, a very highly secure, highly predictable methodology for protecting that data. Again, right from the time the data is born, the little baby data, the baby data in the crib, protecting it all the way through to when that data is more mature and ready to archive off to the cloud, maybe even in there.
Yeah.
So, Pure takes that very seriously. It has a good process around that.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's great. But I think, like, if you're thinking about that from a greenfield, that's a little bit easier because you're starting out fresh, clean. Let's put the policy in.
Right.
But most of us have established areas here. Have you guys integrated this into your fleet management and other capabilities so that you can make this easier and repeatable?
Absolutely. Well, as you know, so as ransomware has matured, unfortunately, as a threat out there, so too have our approaches to it, and absolutely. So starting it from immutability, increasing it with that indelibility, but also now with Fusion being able to do fleet management and apply a single policy across your entire fleet. So it's great even if you have a single array and you're a kind of a starter Pure type customer, but also with our most mature, very well spread out customers can apply these sort of principles across the board. And then we added something called always on, where if you're a customer and you've got folks that are creating volumes kind of outside the realm of that, always on means it goes into a default protection group, which means that, hey, it's protected with a standard set of snapshot rules and protections with safe mode to be able to protect that data. And then you can say, well, this is Henry's video collection. We don't need this protected. You can move it outside that. But if it was something very important or very critical that wanted to be preserved, it can be that. So that's kind of the evolution of that protection to say, well, let's make sure we have this for our customers immediately. And then they can opt out of using it for those volumes they create, and just make sure everything is safe right off the bat.
Yeah, I definitely want to emphasize that ability to have consistency, create these policies, be able to deploy them over multiple systems. Because the problem is, again, I harp on this again, but this is we have very dynamic infrastructures and workloads these days. It's not about this super database that we have sitting there that's been sitting there for 10 years.
Right.
That's not what today's infrastructure is. Today's infrastructure, today's dynamics, things are popping up, things are going away, things are popping up, and we have to be able to keep up. I mean, if we're not, humans might not be able to keep up with all these things, especially if things are getting more and more rapid, especially in these cloud native type use cases where things are here, then they're gone, then they move somewhere else, and they're back again. We need to be able to track those things. And I think that's why I harp on the manageability part of this. It's not just the immutability. It's not just the monitoring. It has to be easy. It has to be automated. It has to be global. Ease of use is not just a gimmick. It actually has to be a core part of this. If it's not easy to use, you're not going to use it. And if you're not going to use it, by the way, here come these threats.
That's right. And when we talk about decreasing the attack plane, that's part of it. How can we make it more automated so that there's just a single point of configuration in there? That way, no array is left behind, if you will, in there as well. And that's what customers are asking everybody for, that kind of automation and ease of use. Like you said, it's not just a figure of speech out there. It has to actually be easy to implement. And when you talk about collaboration between departments and that, it's easier to communicate what a standard set of rules are. that are going in. That way, everybody's on the same page. And it's like, well, what about this one? What about one of our 27 arrays out here? Is it following this thing? Well, they know that it is, and they know exactly what it is. So great point on that, Henry.
Yeah, absolutely. Again, we got to do it well. Don't be afraid to complain. This is too hard to use. It's too hard to use.
That's right.
It's not your fault. They need to be able to help and fix, and that should be a criteria when you're looking and trying to judge these various different products out there. Let's get to the next phase. Next phase is another big one here: detection. Going into the networks, going to systems, facilities. How do we monitor these things and potentially figure out if there's a cybersecurity threat, both from both sides of the teams? Yeah, obviously, when we start thinking about this, a lot of this is on the security team. They have their own tools for going and detecting and seeing things that are potential problems. But I think one of the things I've noticed over the last couple of years is, especially on the storage side, a lot of the storage players are getting involved here, and they're not sitting on their hands. They're going in there and saying, "Hey, this looks weird. Maybe you should take a look at that." Well, in a more eloquent way, Jason, can you explain what is Pure doing today to help on this detection front, monitoring front? What are you doing with your systems and your software capabilities to help find these issues?
Yeah, as part of that all hands on deck, everybody work together, call from the customers to do that. We've definitely built a lot of stuff in. Some of it's native inside of our Pure One, being able to do anomaly detection and read-write latency reports, even with our data protection assessment, calling out what volumes aren't protected by safe mode to enhance resilience there, but also on the security assessment side, do you have expired logons out there? Who's using default password protections in there? So a lot of native stuff built into Pure One, but also integrations with our SIMSOAR XDR type of partners out there as well. If there's an anomaly seen with one of the SIMSOAR or if something is irregular, calling out an alert and automating a snapshot function. Let's lock that down. Let's turn that off. Let's stop user access. Those kind of automations around detection, creating policy on Pure is some of what is being built into and continued to be leaned into to add to that. So it's not just your product detecting it, and then you have to go and take action on it, working together so that when it's detected, there's action being taken on there. And that's the wave of the future, Henry. That is what is being asked from everybody, and that is what's happening with us right now.
I definitely want to highlight one use case and scenario for, I'm sure a couple of you in the room, a couple of security guys are skeptical. Why do I need my storage guy telling me what to do? I don't need them. But let's start thinking about, well, what does storage see that security doesn't see? Well, storage sees things as data is written, and they also see things as they're modified. I was blown away when I started thinking about this, but your tools can detect, hey, wait a second, why did the deduplication ratio drop? A lot of times that happens because somebody encrypted data in the background because encrypted data doesn't dedupe as well. Those are some of the things that a security person may not see. What happens if that issue happened inside and they were doing encryption there? Those are types of things you can start seeing in terms of that looks kind of suspicious. Other things you could see that what does a storage guy, what does a storage person see that maybe security doesn't see? Your people copying data. Like, why is that person moving so much data?
Right.
What's going on here with those type of things? But yeah, to me, this is the evolution of the cycle. The faster we can detect these things, the more we can go and have concrete, this is probably an issue. I think the more we can triage these things and make sure we're prioritizing. So again, if over 50% of the things are passing past, these issues are getting coming by too fast and you can't deal with them, the best way to do it is let's prioritize. If you see something and Jason sees something, maybe something's there.
Right.
Let's go look at that one first. Let's figure out why hundreds of terabytes or hundreds of gigabytes just got encrypted for no reason or copied or deleted.
That's right.
Again, I think that's why we start thinking about these things, why it has to be more of a team sport, more of these issues where we have to work closer together. Another issue is when we start looking at how do we respond, which we were just talking about again. the coordination response is required to make sure that all the hands are on deck when there's a potential threats. I think we talked about it earlier in terms of tabletop exercises, making sure everybody's in the room, everybody knows. Let's face it, it is a fire drill, but it's a fire that's probably going to happen. So let's make sure we can deal these things. And the last segment that we'll talk about also is on the recovery side. Backup teams need to ensure that the recovery of assets and operations works well, while the security team needs to make sure the recovery data is not compromised. Those are big issues, but here I'm going to highlight something a little different. I noticed one of the new services that you added was a disaster recovery service. And by that, I'll highlight one of these big issues, especially when it comes to security type incidents. The issue is, if there's a security incident, it's not like a fire and the thing disappeared. No, you still have the box, but the problem is if the box is compromised, you can't just go use the box. And the reality is you're going to need to have a stand-in replacement system to be able to do those workloads. And can you tell us a little bit about Pure Storage's disaster recovery service and how that can potentially help customers?
Absolutely. When we talk about tiered resilience for that very reason, let's have a second tier for that data in case your police tape. Believe it or not, Henry, insurance companies don't just take your word for it. When you do a cyber insurance claim, you're going to get an adjuster just like you would at your house. So they're going to want to see everything intact. So what do you do? And some of our customers aren't two-site customers in there that have that layered resilience, that tiered resilience for a second site. So what do you offer then? Well, we offer through our Evergreen One program, we offer the cybersecurity, cyber recovery SLA to be able to send a clean array within 48 hours to the site, along with a service member, to be able to help rack it, but more importantly, plan the recovery with you. Like we're going to send it to you. It's there. Let's figure out what we need to be able to do that. It's a great service that provides that peace of mind over the top of what you already have. I know I have Immutable Indelible already with Pure, but now I have this service that even if something happens and the array is compromised and I can't fix it because of those extenuating circumstances, now you have a clean array to be able to recover to and be able to get back up and running very quickly. So yeah, it's a great service. And that service wasn't born out of my imagination, Henry. This was the community telling us what they needed, and Pure is able to respond with that kind of program.
Yeah, and I'll definitely harp back to the data point from earlier. Again, 70% of the respondents that had an incident, significant to a moderate amount of effort. Part of that effort is this: how do I get that second box up online? How do I get that thing running? How do I make sure while that's running, on the other side, I have an isolated lab, because you don't want the ransomware getting out while you're doing your forensics. You don't want anything to happen while it's going out. Right. It's just, we have to have that. It's not a luxury to have that second box taking place. You need to do that while you're doing the repairs. And I think that's something we have to keep in mind and start thinking about going forward, because if we can't do that, how can you make sure? Because the last thing you want to do is go and say, okay, all right, we're done. Let's hit that snapshot. And you recovered a snapshot that has ransomware still on it. That's right. Yep. You're back to square one. Then you got to start everything all over again, and same problems. But I mean, again, I think those are those big issues that we have to start thinking about. And I think those are the reasons why the security and storage teams need to work closer together for that.
Yep.
And with that, that was the end of our prepared remarks here. Let's go into some Q&A.
Yes, always love questions. They're good questions. Let's see, a couple of them have come in here. Henry, you want to check off that first one there? Looks good.
Yeah, let's start with this first question. First question is, what is the typical mistake customers make when addressing cyber resiliency? I'm going to start with Jason. I'll start with you, Jason.
All right. Yeah. No, I do see this a lot. It's a gigantic world out there. You could say, oh, I love the NIST framework, I want to get into it. And then you look at this and you say, well, where do I go first? And the mistake that a lot of customers make, at least this is what I experienced, Henry, is that they go too far down one road. Like they get too far into recover and they don't address some of the other buckets in there, or they go too far in prevention, and then they're stuck when something does get past sports analogy, the goalie. There's a crease and somebody takes advantage, and now you're not as prepared in there. So That's a mistake that I think you go too far down one road and get too myopic in what you address, and you don't address everything. The best thing to do, and what I say is create little buckets for your projects, just like if Henry has here: protect, detect, respond, recover. Right? That's great. You want visibility and resilience. That speaks to all of that. So your projects can go in those, and then you can address after every cycle. Part of that debrief, part of that governing, is saying, hey, seems like we did well with the recover, but not as well in the protect. How can we address that? Or we did well in the detection, we saw it, but something got wrong and we weren't able to recover. Look, 70%, it took too long for us as a group tonight. And then you can address things. And where that's important, Henry, what we see is when you go to get money for future projects, because there's, unless I missed it, nobody has figured out the money tree growing on there. So when you go to the board, if you simplify things in those kind of buckets and thing, you avoid that common mistake of going too far and spending so much that the board says, whoa, we just spent all this. What are you talking about? Recover now. Now you have something that everybody's able to talk about in there. That's the mistake I see customers make. And that's the solution that I would say, just off the top there, how I would address it moving forward.
Yeah, and I'll add to that. I mean, when I look at this, it's such a big issue. Again, if we're doing these things, we're doing the work, it's okay. We made the investment. We spent all this time planning. We did it. Good. Take a deep breath. Then you stop and you remember it's a shared responsibility. I don't care how much money you spent on these things. If you're not doing your work to make sure that this is maintained and up to speed, especially as your environment changes, as your workload changes, that's on you.
Yeah.
I mean, even if you have a service provider, it's a shared responsibility. You have to do these things from a security standpoint, from a data protection standpoint, from an application standpoint. We need to make sure we're doing these things. It's a constant issue we need to take care of. It's not something that, okay, I bought the insurance, we're done. I think that's the one thing we have to make sure. I know you invested a lot of money in it. I know you spent a lot of time doing the planning and the RFPs and all these different things you had to do to look at and all the implementation, but that's just the starting point, unfortunately. We need to do a much better job maintaining this thing and changing, because let's face it, you're probably in an environment that's evolving and changing. And if you're not, then I feel bad for your business. Your business should be evolving, right? Yeah. Your business should be creating data. Your business should be creating all these different things that are valuable, should be creating IP. All these different things are very important. And if they're not, then that's on you. But I mean, again, I think one of the things I would emphasize, it is a shared responsibility there. Let's get to the second question here. How do you address third-party vendors with security?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. And there's a lot big talk about making big investments, right? A lot of companies do invest in employee training to try to prevent. Again, that's the prevention. All it takes is one to get it passed, but it's a good strategy. You don't want to go too far down that road. But what I see, I do see this, that third parties sometimes aren't treated with the same sort of veracity as internal employees. And Henry, I think I don't know what you think about this, but I think that's a mistake. I think you should handle third-party vendors like you handle your internal type of security. You want to make sure everybody's on the same page and everybody's behaving the same in your environment. That's my take. I think with third-party vendors, if that's the context of the question, is you want to treat them the same as you would an internal employee in terms of security.
Yeah, I agree. Yeah, I think there's many dynamics to look at with the third-party side. I think you want to choose, for better or worse, you want to choose vendors that work well with other vendors. Right. You don't want somebody who's solid off saying, well, we've got something for you here. We got something here for you here. Well, what if your security team already has tools or has these different things? You may not want to just go and say, okay, vendor A, we'll buy everything from you. No, that's not reality. People have investments, people have infrastructure. They already have skin in the game for those type of assets. And we need to do a better job making sure that all the third parties work together. I think I'll go back and harp to the other point. It's still a shared responsibility. Yeah. Let them help me help you. Going back to that old line. Right. You can hire these people to help you with resiliency. You could hire them to help you make sure that, maybe they're doing the day-to-day backups in there, or maybe they're responsible for helping you with the recovery jobs. But if they don't have the knowledge from your infrastructure teams, your stakeholders, how do they know what's important? How do they know, let's make sure this happens first? How do they know what should be the order of the recovery? All these different things have to work together. And I think that kind of highlights why we need to work really well and do a good job, a better job with third-party vendors if they're going to be helping us in these environments.
Yep. Agreed.
Great. I think that's the last question we had for today. Jason, thank you so much for joining us. This is a great discussion.
Yeah, I love the research, Henry. Wow, the numbers that you presented are staggering. But it's real. It's what we see out there as well. Thanks for bringing that all together. And it's a great that's great research there, and it's worth digging into to prepare yourselves better if any of you are out there doing that.
All right, great. Thanks so much for everybody. Thanks for joining us.
All right. Well, thanks to Henry and Jason for putting together a really informative presentation and for all those insights there in the Q&A. You've got to love any presentation that leads to a reference to War Games. What a great movie. And but just to echo what Jason was saying, there's so many great data points in Henry's data today. Lots of stuff to think about. And just a quick reminder that you can get more of that intel in the handout section here in the final moments of this webinar. There's the S&P research, and then there's some 451 research. So check that out if you want some more detail. And before we wrap up, we have one more piece of business. That's the Amazon gift card prize drawing. And the winner of the $250 Amazon gift card today is Vrej and Barson from California. So congratulations to Vrej. We'll be in touch to get you your card. And with that, on behalf of the Actual Tech Media team, I want to thank Pure Storage for making this event possible. And thanks as always for attending and for your great questions. That's going to conclude today's event. Have a fantastic rest of your day.